One of the concepts, the key concepts that we discussed last time through was the notion of place-based economic development. And what do we mean by that? Really what we're talking about there is we're adhering, when we think about viable projects, we're adhering to the fundamentals of real estate economics. Things have to be feasible or they won't be built. We're also thinking of things like competitive position and placing Gilroy in the optimal competitive position within the regional market to attract high quality development. And one of the goals there is to create fiscal revenue that will support the city long term in terms of service provision, pension obligations, and so forth. So we want to create the most advantageous, attractive, long-term, sustainable community possible through the new development that we're evaluating here, to ensure that we don't have a flash in the pan. We're not solving for a quick fix retail strategy or something of that nature. Our interest in doing this place-based economic strategy is to position you for the long term to create enduring value in the community. And so that's a real critical element of what we're looking at here. Another aspect is really attracting the labor force. And so how do you attract millennials and other highly skilled, creative elements of the labor force from, say, the Bay Area proper down the 101 corridor to Gilroy? And so to do that, you have to have a compelling value proposition to that labor force. It has to be employment campuses that are interesting, multifaceted, places where people want to be. And so by doing all these things and adhering to what we call an export-based strategy, where we're looking to bring money from the outside into Gilroy, that can be through tourism, it can be through shopping at the outlets, it can be through attracting advanced manufacturing and highly sought after commercial development such as that. So it's a multi-pronged strategy, and we talked about the elements of that in some detail last time. But that's just a refresher in terms of what we mean when we say place-based. So just thinking about sort of Gilroy's individual sites and corridors is what we're going to do today primarily, and then we'll get to some next steps that we're recommending. So again, we just went through this: strengths of local industries, workforce, market dynamics. How do you attract new investment and strengthen your existing businesses? And that's a really critical element as well. You want to retain all the investment among your loyal business owners you have around town. In some cases, we've recommended that you tread lightly as not to displace people that may be sensitive or serve key components of the population. So that's something that we've been mindful of. And then we've also been exploring sort of trends, best practices in the industry in terms of how you morph employment centers to be more interesting, more viable, more effective in terms of attracting the employee and the companies that seek these employees. The image we show here is Bishop Ranch in San Ramon, and we do mention in that second bullet sometimes that effort to create quality and lasting value and financial feasibility involves the integration of residential in select cases. This image here is Bishop Ranch, where they've upgraded the business park in San Ramon, not by adding residential, but adding a retail spine through the business park. And that gives not only the employees a place to go for lunch and something to do after work, but it also provides a source of revenue, both directly and indirectly, to the owners of that park, directly in terms of having retail tenants that they're leasing to, but indirectly in that because this is an amenity, the companies will be more likely to pay higher lease rates for the space in the longer run. So it really works in a couple of different ways in that case. Again, just to refresh, last time we were here, we talked about Gilroy's strategic location. It's very high quality between Salinas and the Silicon Valley, uniquely positions you to attract certain facets of agricultural technology companies and the like, as well as other things such as tourism, small-scale manufacturing, industrial services, and so forth. We'll come to this in a few minutes, and we talked about it a bit last time, but tenants are being squeezed out of both the Silicon Valley and Salinas for various reasons. And so I think we're going to see an influx of smaller companies looking for space, looking for speculative R&D or light industrial space throughout the city. So I'm going to talk about some of the major segments here. This is starting with the industrial R&D segment. This is truly a strength of Salinas, as you well know. You have a long legacy of major projects in this area. And it's a very diverse sector. It can encompass projects all the way from storage to advanced manufacturing and everything in between. What we're seeing on these slides, this is UNFI on the upper left. Of course, you have one of their major facilities here in town. Moving across to the right, we have one of your existing buildings over on Mayock Road. Bottom left is the inside of the Tesla facility in Fremont. And then you can see the Volvo R&D Center in Sunnyvale. So, you know, it's really a diverse collection of different subsectors, and all of them theoretically have a place here in Gilroy going forward. You can see from this graph, you have actually a fairly sizable industrial R&D sector here in town. If you were to add both Gilroy and Morgan Hill together, you're just under half of the Salinas market, and Salinas is a major industrial submarket. Clearly, you're dominated by the San Jose market, but when you look at some of the trends that are coming forward, you can see how things are going to change. So this is a graph of average vacancy in your industrial markets, and it stretches from 2013 first quarter to 2018 first quarter. And as you can see here, Gilroy went from the highest vacancy in the region to the lowest vacancy in the region. So that tells you something. It's an important piece of information. This is average annual lease rates. And in this case, Gilroy has gone from one of the lowest in the region to one of the highest in the region. So those are really promising indicators. And what it means is, and what it should mean, is that there's going to be more development. And in fact, if you look at what's happening in the market, you can see that Gilroy is a major percentage of the Gilroy Morgan Hill market, probably about 90% or more of that grouping. And there's been more activity here than in the Salinas market. And even looking at the San Jose market, you're sort of in the same universe from an order of magnitude standpoint, which is really impressive. Now, San Jose is actually losing, actually they did have some new space constructed, but they are overall losing square footage in this category, and that's why Gilroy has a particular opportunity to pick up some of the key users that you may want to capture. So it's definitely a promising outlook in the industrial area. Now, in the office sector, this is office development is an indicator of more mature sort of markets. Gilroy has an office presence. It's quite different than what you might see in San Jose. The upper left image is the new office piece that's coming in behind Santana Row. I'm sure many of you have seen it. It's quite upper end, and this is a good indicator of the new product that seems to be covering Silicon Valley, from head to toe. It is displacing a lot of the smaller users, however, and I think that's part of the dynamic that I just mentioned a moment ago. The image on the right is a more modest version of office space, a two-story tilt-up product, and this is indicative of the type of construction we see here in Gilroy. It indicates a lower lease rate. It's cheaper to construct, so you don't need to charge as much in your lease rate. And it is a good fit for many of the tenants that are interested in Gilroy. And in the report, we do indicate that there's quite a bit of interest we see from architecture, engineering, various services, and so forth, that want to be in the periphery of Silicon Valley, but not necessarily in the middle of it where they're getting priced out and have a lot of pressure. And as you might expect, there's not been a lot of activity in terms of leasing here in Gilroy. Even Morgan Hill is not that strong in that category, even though they are closer to San Jose. Vacancy is basically, it's coming down in Gilroy, but that's a good sign. But lease rates really aren't coming up very quickly. And so you have this sort of lease rates and stasis. That's not going to result in a lot of near-term, large-scale, pure office development. I think your best bets are more in the office R&D area, again, using tilt-up construction technology, lower cost, sort of accommodating firms in the services professions, including engineering and architecture. I am, sort of reminded, I saw Rob Onito from RJA here. Their office on Arroyo Circle is sort of in this category of office R&D. It's a good example of the type of office that works really well here in Gilroy. Sorry, Rob. So here you can see in the office sector, again, there's just no activity as far as construction, but that doesn't mean that the more industrial blend or hybrid of office can't work in the future, and I think it actually is a part of the stronger sort of industrial sector that we mentioned a moment ago. Retail. So the images you see here are, on the left you have the factory store from Nike in your outlets. And again, on the right-hand side, you have the Golden State Brewing Company downtown. These are indicative of the type of retail that is working here in Gilroy, which you may call experiential retail. It's retail that you are entertained by as you shop, effectively. You can see here that in terms of leasable square feet, again, relatively small part of the overall regional market. You can see that vacancies are coming down over time, so that's good. Again, you're not seeing sort of the retail lease rate growth you would want to see to support a lot of new development. Excuse me. So what that means is sort of thinking about, and again, not a lot of construction activity. So this is to say that the fundamentals don't necessarily indicate there's going to be a big ramp up or huge demand among retailers for additional space in Gilroy. I think the best bet is again, sort of looking for those niche opportunities as related to the strength you have, such as the outlets and such as your burgeoning downtown. And here you can see sort of, in a nutshell, what we're sort of talking about here from all aspects of the real estate market. On the upper left-hand corner, you can see this is the Mace Ranch Innovation Center proposed for Davis. The project is still alive. They're trying to determine how much residential development could be included. This is a rendering of a project that would include a bit of residential within the town center of the project. The rest of the project is fully dedicated to industrial and office R&D employment. So the residential in this case is being positioned to help underwrite the provision of jobs effectively. You couldn't build the commercial space for the industrial without having the residential component to strengthen the financial feasibility effectively. On the right-hand side, you can see I think it's an Apple store. And if you've been to an Apple store, you know it's sort of an experience. You have fun, you're trying new products. It's sort of a gee whiz, sort of experience. And same thing could be said for the bottom left, where we have, I believe this is a Nike experiential sort of store, one of their new format that they're rolling out in other parts of the country. And again, that might be something to look at, a type of thing to look at in terms of positioning near or within your outlets to try to inject some additional energy into the outlets and keep them on the radar for people that are touring the South Bay and Northern California that may be interested in other aspects of Gilroy as well. Okay, so with those sort of fundamentals established, we wanted to take you through some of the sites in terms of corridors and opportunity sites. And you can see here's a visual depiction of the various opportunity sites scattered about town, and then you can also see the 3 corridors being 1st Street, 10th Street, and Monterey Street. And so I'm going to take you briefly through some of these key sites and provide sort of an overview in terms of what we think what our assessment is in terms of future uses. So to start with the first site, opportunity site number 1, Los Animas. This is located North Gilroy along Monterey Street. It's zoned M1. It's about 50 acres. The general plan considers 3 different alternatives for this: an industrial park, a neighborhood district, or an employment center. Less controversial, of course, in this case because it is located on the west side of 101. So certainly there is good precedent for residential development, and in fact it abuts the project. Our assessment is that this is really an ideal place to provide some employment generating uses and perhaps integrate some medium density residential, again using that diversified approach, diversified portfolio to try to bring a financially feasible project forward. Certainly from a constraint standpoint, there are some issues with traffic mitigations. Certainly the San Ysidro alignment is something that needs to be worked on in this area. There's some CEQA work that would have to be done. So it's really about solving traffic mitigations and making the traffic funding situation more tolerable for people that get out in front. And if somebody is to come in and make improvements on their frontage or make an off-site improvement to an interchange, they are reliant on oftentimes the next developer downstream to reimburse them for the portion of those improvements that go beyond their individual project. The problem is when you have an uncertain future or an uncertain real estate market or an irregular land supply, and you're not sure if the next project is going to be able to get through the entitlement process, that adds up to risk effectively, and both risk in terms of time and then the time value of money, which is ticking away all the while. So it's very important. We do provide some fairly detailed traffic mitigation suggestions in terms of the funding equation that can diversify and improve the way that transportation infrastructure is financed in Gilroy. I think there's some meaningful improvements that could be made. And so we're suggesting that the city staff take a look at some of our suggestions, and we are available to offer more advice, more detailed advice on that topic along the way. Second opportunity site is San Ysidro. You can see it's on the corner of Los Animas and San Ysidro Avenues, 11 acres, C3 shopping center. All general plan alternatives see this as general services commercial. This site is immediately adjacent, it's a small site on the right side of the freeway there, just above the Gilroy outlets. And because of that proximity, we think it's a golden opportunity to try to help improve the competitive position of the outlets. And so we're seeing trends around the country, and in fact this is happening in Livermore, where you're creating entertainment functions, you're creating more of the experiential aspect of the retail to try to give a little bit more entertainment value to properties such as the outlets. And so again, we think this is an opportunity for that here in town. We don't necessarily see the need for more retail just for retail's sake. There's a chance that you have enough as far as day-to-day sort of community and regional retail, and even neighborhood retail is of course calibrated to your population and comes along over time. But in this case, it's about positioning the outlets for maximum success. And so if you can add say tap rooms or other really innovative sort of Nike, sort of experiential stores, or just things that sort of fall into this category of experiential retail, we think this is really a good site for it. And again, it is plagued by some of the same concerns that relate to traffic mitigation and overall circulation.
So David, real quick with regards to that particular site, this is the San Ysidro site north of Home Depot, is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, so under the constraints though, the property immediately north of Home Depot is actually in the county. That's not city property. I mean, it's not within the city limits. Mm-hmm. And so, in my mind, that's a huge constraint because we have no control over it, and we would have to go through LAFCO to even, try to bring it into the city so that we could do some sort of, project or something there.
Yeah. You're a little bit hemmed in, it looks like, and to the extent.
Well, thank you, LAFCO. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So to the extent that you could access that through an interior road, again, it's a very narrow parcel, so it would have to be subject to some careful study to see sort of what your different building prototypes might look like and whether it's deep enough and things like that. So it doesn't come necessarily easily, given the constraints that you're talking about. It is a major concern, I agree.
Okay, thank you.
Number 3 is the SOUTHPOINT Business Park, and this is located at Arroyo Circle and Camino Arroyo. Again, just looking at it, you can see that this project sort of fills a gap in the urbanized landscape on the east side of 101. It lacks connection, that it would be necessary from a circulation standpoint, so you would need to come through with a road extension to serve this piece. It's 66 acres, so it's got some nice scale. It's currently zoned M2, and the general plan alternatives are basically general industrial, large-scale manufacturing, warehousing, and distribution. This is where we are suggesting that you open the possibilities to consider or contemplate the possibility of integrating perhaps modest components of residential within a larger kind of mixed-use development scheme. And this would be not only to, again, provide that amenity value, but to improve the financial feasibility of the project, since, the residential development is by far the most financially viable of all the uses in Gilroy at this time at the market rate. So you can see sort of, we do think there's, again, niche opportunities here for perhaps medical office, and then looking at sort of professional, scientific, technical services, as we mentioned before. Those would all be sort of a continuation of some of the development that we currently see out in that direction. And again, it's not going to come easily. This is subject to the ag mitigation requirements, so you're going to have to replace one for one any property that is converted from agriculture. We are suggesting, as you may have noted in the report, it would be much more expeditious if there were an ag in lieu fee that could be paid instead of going through the process of specifically identifying replacement land and going through the process required. And this may be a longer term proposition. We understand Morgan Hill has had some difficulty in this regard with LAFCO. And so this may be a longer term prospect in terms of compelling your neighbors to the north that perhaps there are other ways of mitigating agriculture, and certainly the in lieu fee is something that we would advocate a closer look at. The other thing, of course, is off-site traffic mitigations, roadway extensions, and so forth. And then finally, we do understand that there has long been a tradition here in Gilroy of not doing residential on the east side of 101. We have not talked to anybody yet who knows exactly why that is the case. So our suggestion is to maybe look at it in terms of how it could be integrated into these projects if it's not dominating them and if it helps to bring jobs. And I think that's really the bottom line, is we're talking about diversifying and growing the economic base. And so if it doesn't accomplish that, then it's probably not worth pursuing.
So David, can you go back to that map, the overview, and kind of, I don't know if you have a pointer or anything, but I think it's really important
I
that.
don't believe I do.
Okay. Okay, yeah, use the mouse then. I think it's really important to show the audience and the council, for that matter, kind of where that extension is, because we're not really looking at 66 acres. Where that connection starts and ends.
Right, and so here you can see the cutoff of the access road here. And then presumably, and Tammy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you would want to, sorry, I lost my mouse, come through something like that. Is that generally correct?
That's generally correct. It's a, yeah, you could see the curve there at the bottom of the screen there that you would be connecting to.
Yeah.
A little bit to your right, and down, right around there.
Yeah.
There you go. So that's the route that a future road would go, in a sense, cutting what is our business park in half.
Right.
And so, again, I just think it's really important for the audience to really see that it's not a true 66 acres of available land.
Yeah, good point. Good point. And I thought I would, per our last discussion, I brought a couple of examples of other sites that have been diversified in the manner that I'm suggesting. And so one of these would be, let's see, I want to make sure I'm not missing anything.
I have a comment on this, on number 3, though, if you want to go back to it, unless you're still going to stay on this.
I am, but that's okay.
Okay. As the Felices have owned that property for a long, long time, and have told me that they have been, with this current zoning, they've not been able to get anything on it. So we're going to, I think, this council needs to look at changing that zoning to something that it benefits nobody to just stay vacant like it is. And with what we're trying, so I'm just pointing out that it's been the same property owner trying to get someone in there with the existing zoning, and it's not happening.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a good point, and that's exactly right. And so there's, a couple of options here. One is just to open up the commercial zoning a little bit and to allow a little more flexibility on that front. And then going beyond that is the brazen suggestion of looking at the possibility of residential. And which brings me to Hacienda Business Park, which was initially developed by a fellow named Joe Callahan. And Joe basically, in the not the most recent Great Recession, but if you recall, there was a recession before that in the 90s. So Joe basically lost the project. It was a single-use business park at that time. He essentially lost that project to his financier, which was Prudential. And Prudential went through immediately, began a process of diversifying the zoning on the project. And you can see this is a current, now they've also rebranded the project the Hacienda Innovation Park. It's no longer a business park. And you can see that basically now you have a combination of general office, garden office, mid-rise office, research and development, retail, commercial, mixed office, industrial, commercial, mixed use, and residential. And you can see the sort of the yellow splotches where the residential is. And they've done a pretty good job overall of mixing these use concepts in a way that works on the land, on the ground. And again, this is not an uppity sort of new urbanist project or anything that is inappropriate for the east side of Gilroy. This is sort of the same kind of environment, a kind of a traditional business park environment that's been adapted over time. And so that's kind of what we're suggesting here is some modest adaptions on the margin, just to whether that's zoning or the inclusion of residential to try to improve the overall bottom line. And here's some of you can see some of the architectural prototypes in Hacienda. They've updated and refreshed some of the office space, which is nice. And you can see some of the residential, which is actually quite diverse. They do have, on the bottom left, you can see some of the multifamily, and then on the right, you can see they actually have some single family on the site as well. And it all works quite well. It is a much larger site than any of those that we're looking at, so I don't know that you would be able to do these single family type uses, but certainly some well-conceived, well-integrated multifamily could work very well, in our opinion. Okay, number 4, TVT. We spent a good hour plus on this just about an hour ago, and so we don't need to belabor it. I will say that you can again look at the general plan alternatives, or in this case the downtown station area plan alternatives. Alt 3 is hotel, as contrasted to a pure retail concept, as contrasted to number 1, which incorporates parking for the train station. We believe that this site is absolutely critical as a hotel site, so I applaud the developer for sort of moving that direction. It's the sort of opportunity where you really have multiple segments you can work with. You can pull people off the freeway, but you also have the proximity to the train station and the downtown. And so it's really a great site for a hotel, and I think you guys should seriously consider that use. And at one point, the developer mentioned a second hotel. I think you'd be very fortunate if that were actually the case. I think you certainly you face, as in his case, the need to generate revenue, and so he's looking at a variety of different uses, including some highway service uses, and those make sense given the freeway proximity. But the key thing is really that I think the hotel and some of the amenities are sort of serving dual purposes, not only functioning as a highway service commercial use, but really importantly oriented also to the interior of the rail station planning area, and try to encourage that the creation of a district in that area. The developer did mention some of the constraints here in terms of ingress, egress, and some off-site traffic mitigation, as well as the fire station. And certainly those are all things that you appear to be looking at appropriately. Okay, number 5, we're back on the east side of the freeway again, and this is Rancho San Isidro. You can see it's 60 acres. Again, to the mayor's earlier point, once you complete the circulation within the parcel to complete that circulation concept and to provide service to the parcel, some of that 60 acres is going to be whittled away, so net developable might be closer to, say, 50 or so. Certainly, in the general plan, it's not proposed for any change. It's being considered as a continuation of its combination of zoning, which is both C3 and M2, general industrial. And again, we think this is a second site where this mixed use approach that we discussed with Hacienda and so forth makes a lot of sense, and so we think that's something that you might want to look at in this location as well. Again, it's an ag mitigation policy site, so it's going to be complicated by virtue of that, and it also faces some of the same challenges as far as traffic mitigation and off-site improvements. Number 6, Gilroy Crossing, Regency Phase 2, a smaller site. It's just below, if you can see right here. This is basically what we're talking about. And it is a rather small site, and so it's basically a planned unit development, C3, M2, and HC. No change suggested by the general plan. We understand that there's been some thinking about this parcel in terms of it becoming retail. The retail segment, however, is, as many have noted, it's challenged by online presence, and on a per capita basis, we are in danger, both here in Gilroy as well as other cities, of being over-retailed. And so I think this may be a place that's useful to think about in terms of small-scale manufacturing. We talked about the squeeze from Salinas and Silicon Valley as other types of projects are chasing small fabrication and manufacturing shops out. We think this is the type of site in Gilroy where perhaps you could do some multi-tenant spec that appeals to the the smaller users, potentially in electrical equipment and such industries. And in fact, we are seeing some evidence now that multi-tenant spec is a better bet. Joey McCarthy is pursuing that type of project on one of his sites. And so I think that there is reason to expect that we're going to see an emergence of multi-tenant spec, especially if we continue to see tightening vacancy and increasing lease rates per the charts that we looked at earlier. Okay, now moving kind of all the way across the valley over to the west, Hecker Pass Highway, Gilroy Gardens. The city, of course, controls all of this Gilroy Gardens land. We're focusing just on the 35 acres that is highway commercial zoned in this case, and this would be visitor serving commercial. And again, we see this site being basically a key support site for the larger master plan concept that is coming forward. And so at this stage, we understand there's some very interesting concepts and exciting thinking going on regarding what this area can be, to the extent that you're able to provide investor slash developer interests with the moving forward on the larger area. We think that this 35 acres makes an excellent sort of service center, or almost base village, if you will, to serve the larger project. And again, this is something where you can see in many of our other types of resorts, there usually is sort of a collection point, a community area. We think that the city's 35 acres really could serve that niche very well. And this is not to say that we would be, again, advocating retail for retail's sake, but things that are more appealing to the visitor. Thinking about hotels, restaurants, outdoor recreation focus, even really innovative uses such as, say, the Oxbow Market that you'll find in Napa. It's a really interesting multi-tenant space with some innovative food and a lot going on. Very exciting and interesting. So, there's a lot of really cool things that you could be kind of doing with the 35 acres to support that larger master plan concept. Again, we'll need to look at all the feasibility aspects and so forth, but certainly we're very bullish on this one as being something that could really serve the city's interests. Again, providing that export kind of tourist spending engine for the city. Same goes for the sports park. Again, this is zoned currently A1 agricultural. It's basically slotted for parks and recreation, 78 acres. You have a great opportunity here to, again, bring a net new kind of activity to Gilroy, something that can only help in terms of both serving your local citizens, but also bringing people in from the outside that will spend their money here. And you can see we believe it could pull from San Jose, Morgan Hill, Santa Cruz, Watsonville, Salinas, Monterey, and Hollister. 3 million residents within 50 miles. But you do have some constraints. Obviously, you have to work through the LAFCO approval of the Urban Services amendment, and then the city's ag mitigation policy is in play here as well. So you still have some things to work through, but again, we see this as being a really interesting and exciting way to diversify the local economy. And these projects can be both outdoor oriented, or they can be intensive sort of activity indoor uses. And so you can see a few examples of both of those here. So moving to the corridors here, and again, we're looking at 1st Street, 10th Street, and Monterey Street. We'll start with 1st Street. There were basically two centers that rose to the top as we were looking at this corridor, one of which you were speaking about tonight. And these are, the first is at 1st and Westwood, and then the second is 1st and Kern. This is the Westwood site here, and then this is the Kern site that you were discussing just a few minutes ago. As far as the Westwood site goes, otherwise known as Contempo Plaza, this is an existing commercial site. It has been struggling a bit. It's about 4 acres. General plan alternatives posit either a mixed-use low density or a mixed-use high density. And right now the center is about 60% occupied, which is, you know, a troublesome number for anybody that's running a shopping center. You like to see those numbers much higher, 80% or higher, if you're going to be cash flowing. So this signifies some potential issues. And again, for various reasons, it may not be the best place to do more retail. Again, Gilroy has a good amount of retail today. And so this may be an ideal opportunity to reposition the site as a horizontal mixed-use concept, perhaps with some retail amenities to go along with the residential component. Constraints, excuse me, would be property owner cooperation in terms of having 2 separate ownership entities, and that makes things a bit more complicated and time-consuming. The second site, we heard a lot about this one tonight, and I don't think we need to belabor it. We simply said would tend to agree, and this is not the developer's image, this is just an image that we pulled, so don't bias your decisions with our image. But simply put, this is a high-density residential concept, makes a lot of sense on this site, and we think it works in terms of proximity to schools, parks, stores, etc. It's a good location for residential, and we sort of support the notion that was expressed this evening. Moving to the 10th Street corridor, again, one of the key sites on the 10th Street corridor is the TVT site, so we won't go over that one. But the other piece that's really important in this corridor, which is included in the downtown specific plan and the downtown station plan, is the OSH site that you can see here, former home of Orchard Supply Hardware. It's a 4-acre site. It's perfectly configured. It's paved. It has, obviously it has a building on it. It's currently being used, it appears, as a overflow for car storage from one of the dealerships. And but long term, and the presence of those cars may indicate that there's some cash flow coming to the property owner, which always complicates things when you're trying to reuse a site. But generally, we see this as being a critical element of the long term for the station area. And it pairs up well with the TVT site and some of the other underutilized sites, including all of this UP-owned land in here. If you think about the combination of this property, the site that we're discussing now, and then perhaps some of the other areas that appear to be somewhat underutilized, and again, more study would be needed to look at the overall district. But this entire district has incredible opportunity in terms of creating a really interesting kind of fine-grained kind of station area opportunity. And so we think that sort of a patient approach to working with the owner of OSH site would be recommended. And in terms of uses, we think, again, this is a great, you couldn't do any better from our perspective than doing sort of a transit-oriented development project here. Certainly could be one of your great sort of catalysts. It could include a little bit of mixed use activity and so forth. And again, this one's about landowner intent. And then finally, we get to,
So
yes.
hang on, before you leave the 10th Street. What is going on with that vacant piece of land that is on, near the corner of 10th and Monterey? On the south side, bumps up against the gas station and I think 7-Eleven.
Yeah, actually, we're going to come to that one on the Monterey Street frontage, I believe. No? Okay. So, am I pointing to the right area?
No, it would be further left. Further left. Down, yeah, it's right there off the bottom of the screen, down in that area.
Okay. Open to anybody? Yeah, that's not a
do we
site
know
that
anything
we
going on
looked
with
at
that?
specifically.
I'm sorry?
It's not a site that we looked at specifically.
Okay.
Be happy to do so, though, if you'd like us to.
No, I was just curious because at some point I'd like to see something there and really just clean up that there's a I guess a shared driveway, and it's filthy.
There are a few properties in that area that look like they could use a little TLC.
That's an understatement. All right. All right, thank you. Please continue.
Okay, so we looked at Monterey Street between 3rd and 10th. This is the core of the downtown, as you all know. And as we all know, the transit center is a huge element of this, especially on the southern side. We've looked at a number of pieces here. The first is sort of thinking about Monterey and 3rd Street. This is a small site. It's a vacant parcel. It's not big. It's only 0.3. But we do think that retail, restaurants, cafes, maybe some vertical mixed use would be perfect here. It's sort of a entry to the downtown. So this is I would think a viable site. There may be various reasons why it hasn't moved as quickly as we would hope, and sometimes you do see that sites like this that are so well positioned can be priced near the top of the market. So that may be what's happening. This next, so again, we think this is an area where you can do some pretty interesting things. One of the ideas we thought would be sort of a cafe / co-working space that could augment and add to the presence of co-working space across the street. Certainly seems that with the commute on 101 getting worse all the time, that there will be more spin-offs and more interest among Silicon Valley employees in staying local, and that can be a good trend in terms of seeing some entrepreneurship and some startups. The next is just down the street from that at the corner of 4th Street. This is a larger piece at 0.5 acres. Just that addition of 0.2 additional acres just makes a huge difference, and so this is a really marquee parcel. I think downtown really could do a lot in terms of providing some critical street frontage as far as retail and entertainment and so forth. It is again a gateway site. It's surrounded by some very high quality buildings. So there's not a bad adjacency in the mix at all. So it's really quite a good site. And again, we're thinking 3 stories, mixed use. Would be sort of the way to go on this. And then we move down to what I think is the real highlight of the Monterey Street corridor, and this is the area encompassing the Arts Center and adjacent pieces here. 2.5 acres. This is in the Civic / Cultural Arts District in the Downtown Specific Plan. And again, the downtown posits a number of different options here. One could be parking, another could be sort of an augmentation of the Arts Center with retail, and another would be mixed use and housing. The city has been looking at this for a long time. The city has ownership over it. And so this one offers quite an interesting set of possibilities. When you have control over a site like this, the possibilities become much more wide-ranging, and you can do some creative things to reduce front-end costs and make development a little bit more feasible, especially where you might be pushing the envelope as far as what's been done in Gilroy. And so we think that being across from the transit center, that there's certainly some interesting potential development concepts. One might be a parking structure, but with an activated ground floor space, such as galleries or retail. So I think this is something that we can look at in terms of a real public-private partnership opportunity. The city has the ability to formulate a financial feasibility package that might be acceptable to the private sector, and I think this is really a fascinating possibility. Just across the street, Hornline Court, and this is adjacent to the old gas station that has great reuse potential and includes that gas station. And again, we think that this is, again, right next to the rail station, right next to the tracks, a very, very interesting piece. And you can see an example of sort of an artsy reuse of a gas station on the right-hand side. You can see the gas station in its current use on the left-hand side. But there's, you could do some really interesting things here to highlight your downtown, to create sort of a wow factor near the high-speed rail station. And again, I think given the city's ownership in parts of this area, you could leverage, if you could assemble some properties and do a package deal, you might be able to get something really interesting off the ground. So in terms of next steps, we believe your overall advantages are your market context, your labor force, your quality of life. The challenges, as we've discussed, are the entitlement cost structure, capital funding limitations, and aspects of your land supply. We are going to be engaging with the GPAC coming up to talk about sort of the implications of all this for the general plan process. And then beyond that, we think there's some really interesting public-private partnership opportunities, including the Art Center, as we mentioned, as well as the gardens and the sports park, those being the big three that I think you have a really clear path on to do something really interesting and things that'll make the bring some positive public relations and a positive image to Gilroy. We think that continuing to work on these sort of mitigations, whether it's traffic or it's agricultural replacement, are critical. Right now, things are taking too long, it's too risky. And we would support, beyond that, expanding economic development in general, looking for ways to put a little bit more funding resources into the economic development process, whether that's the city and or the Economic Development Corporation. We think the two should work together, continue working together really well, and we should be creative in terms of looking for opportunities to fund, and we are aware that you've been looking at revolving loan programs and so forth. So that is to be commended. I think you're on the right track, and those efforts should continue. And again, we also understand you're looking at a range of incentives, whether those are impact fee waivers and other sort of instruments that might make things easier and less risky. So that's to be commended as well. We have a number of suggestions in that regard that are fully consistent with the direction that you're going. And then finally, there's just the notion of densifying anybody's downtown. They're always well justified concerns, and rightfully so among the community, but there are ways to do it in a really intelligent, thoughtful, considerate way. You can densify and create and improve your quality of life at the same time, but there are do's and don'ts, and so we would sort of suggest anything you can do to bring along the community and inform and educate the community as to what really successful higher density projects can look like and what they can contribute economically to your community. So that basically wraps it up. I know you've had a long evening here, so I hope I didn't drone on too long, but happy to take any questions.
Okay, council, please queue up.
I just have a,
Go ahead.
so we talked about some of those on the east side, and you were showing, all those properties you were showing were within the Gilroy jurisdiction.
Yeah,
Even
the only
that
one
thin,
that's
narrow
not is
one.
Sports Park.
Right, right.
Yeah.
But even that's, I was trying to remember the one north of Home Depot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just a small little tiny strip of land along the freeway. Is that what you're talking about, that piece?
Yeah, yeah, and the reason why we think it's material is it is just has that immediate visibility and adjacency to the freeway, so it's highly, it's a very conspicuous piece of land there, and then it's immediately adjacent to the outlets. And so the question would be, is there an adjunct use that you could put on that land that would sort of help bring just another facet or another dimension to the outlets? And so it's
So
sort of
that's
a
on the
creative
west side of the road,
That's
because
what
on the
I
east side, they're
wanna-
building a mini
That's-
storage. So you're saying
I
across?
want to clarify this because, David, if you're referring to the land on the west side of Santa Teresa as you're driving north,
San Isidro.
excuse me, San Isidro, as you're driving north, that land is in the city, and the property owner's already been in contact with city staff and working with RJA. Is Rob still here? Yeah. About a possible realignment. Now, on the east side of San Isidro, immediately north of Home Depot, that land is currently being leased by LJB, I believe, and that land is not in the city limits.
So that's this
But,
piece.
but beyond that, you're correct, Kat, the storage unit that's being built there, that is in the city limits. So you go from city to county to city. And
So
that
then
just
where
doesn't
is this property? On the, across the street from the storage unit? Right before the pump house?
Yeah, are you referring to the east side of San Isidro or the west side of San Isidro?
I believe it's the east. Oh, okay.
West side.
Looked like it. Yeah, okay, west side.
Okay, okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Leroy Munoz.
Thank you, and thank you again for a very detailed report. I find these tremendously interesting and really educational, so this is helpful. And I appreciate also the examples you provide from other regions, so thank you for that. If we could just go back to your last slide for a quick second.
Oops,
That's all right.
that was good.
The final slide. Perfect. So at the very bottom there with reference to smart densification, I want to make sure that I understand the full scope of that. When we're talking about densification, are we referring to residential densification, commercial densification, or both?
Both.
Okay, so I wanted to make sure that I understood, again, the scope of all of that.
And I was sort of alluding to, and I think I mentioned this last time I was here, the best example of this I saw about, and Mark worked on this as well, was about a year and a half ago, we worked with the city of Livermore on their downtown and did a series of sort of like workshops with the city council, but it was as much for the general public as it was the city council in terms of becoming comfortable with sort of different levels of density, and then how you sort of marry different uses and then position parks and plazas and open space and so forth, street cross sections, the whole gambit.
Good. That's helpful for me to understand. My second question was with regard to kind of this list of next steps. Are these all of the next steps that we have to follow? Is this a set of possibilities that we pick from?
Yes.
Do we prioritize? How do we use this list?
Yes, this is our suggestion in terms of The one thing that is an absolute next step is a future presentation to GPAC. That's in the scope. The rest of this is really a set of suggestions that are discussed in the report. We think the P3 opportunities sort of speak for themselves. We think the mitigation evaluations, again, we see those as being the big impediments to some of your larger parcels moving forward, and attacking those, I think, is our recommendation. Just an observation that economic development resources, if they could be bolstered, it might be effective. And then commending you essentially on, and encouraging you to continue along some of these lines.
Okay, that's very helpful. Sure. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Council, anybody else? Councilmember Tovar.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have one question. So looking at the wrap-up, we're talking about, well, here, let me ask this question. I don't know if you would be able to, or if our city manager, because one of the important things that we need to get is community input. And before we start to sort of look at projects where we're spending $2-3 million, because in here you said that the community has been long wanting a art center, which is true in a sense, but do we really truly know that that's one of the main priorities that the community wants, and I don't know when the last time that we've done a citywide survey on what the priorities of our residents are, because I'm concerned that we're going to start looking at some of these things and start throwing money here and here and there without truly knowing, is this what the community wants?
Sure.
And I know we've done sort of selected sort of surveys and stuff, but I think that as a council, we really need to do that, and say, okay, let's find out what the priorities of our community are first, and then this helps shape sort of where we go in which direction, because I won't feel comfortable voting on something knowing that the community has not given input, so, again, yeah.
I think there's two things.
Yeah.
One is, I think a clear and obvious sort of next step within all of this is for city staff and EDC staff to sort of take some of this back and to look at it and think about it and talk about it and evaluate it and determine what among it kind of rises to the top from their perspective, right, and what they believe is a feasible kind of bang for the buck thing to be doing. And then I think the other thing is, absolutely agree, it's critical to get your, right, community's input, but it should be educated input. And so I would just say that, in my experience, it's best to try to impart what you can about sort of successful examples as part of that sort of seeking of input.
Right. Yeah, no, and I agree. And I think that we as a council need to strongly think about that, because again, we look at and again, I'm not picking on just the Arts Center, but I'm looking at or hearing, community members, issue with parking obviously is one of the things. So we need to get that feedback, from the community. Say, okay, look, these are the priorities of our community. If it's parking, if it's the Arts Center, if it's downtown, whatever it may be, if we have that in front of us to be able to say, look, now we know what the community truly needs here. Yep. Let's sort of shape our decisions off of that, because right now we don't have any citywide surveys to go off of. Am I correct in saying that?
I would appeal to Gabe and city staff, right, in terms of what surveys have been conducted, but right, I'm not aware of anything
right,
recently.
Yeah, and I think, so again, I guess this is a question or sort of a comment to the council. If that is true, if we have not had a survey, I think it's time for one. Because again, and it's truly going to help us, and I think that we need to do something if it hasn't been done. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Tucker.
Thank you. I just wanted to, I'm actually in response to Councilmember Tovar. This consultant was, his scope is to come back and give us what other cities and what's going on in the industry overall. So it's really up to us which ones we adopt. So I would think, of course, we would do some sort of survey within the community. But then on the other hand, the hard decision is on us, because we're talking economic development, and it can't always be, it has to be something that's going to generate economic development. So economics, because we have some pretty strong unfunded liabilities to us, you know, in the future. So I'm just saying that absolutely we need to talk to our community, whether they want to, you know, 5-story residential on First Street instead of Togo's, or whether, you know, there's things that we could, but in the end, it's the council's hard decision to come up with what's best for the city.
And I totally agree with you.
he's
Thank you
given
for
us
that.
options.
Right. No. I
don't have to follow
Right, we don't
everything
have
he
to
says.
follow. No, I understand that, but I think my comments were more directed to us as a council. Yeah, I know we have to make the ultimate decisions, but I think before we get to that point, we should have community feedback. You know, because
We
again,
definitely should, but one of the steps for that is the General Plan Update Committee, because that one's a huge committee,
Right.
and they all represent various, half of them are here. So they represent many community members, and part of what they represent is their responsibility and role is to go back to their community members and get input. So I think that's also another step
Yeah.
of getting
No,
input.
I agree with you, and I think we're on the same
Yeah,
page
I think
here.
so too. I think
Yeah,
so
yeah. I just, for me, I think, yeah, I understand we have groups that do that, but I think, again, having that citywide survey to be able to say, these are the projects we're looking at, or what are the projects that you would like to see happen, or what's the priority of your, of our city residents. For me, that makes it easier for us to say, okay, maybe spending $3 million on this project isn't one of our priorities, and without that information, we don't know.
Right.
Thank you.
And can I just ask Gabe, do we know a date before it goes to the GPAC? Have you decided yet? or no?
Actually, Gabe is going to be briefing
Okay.
you and I, and then we'll be moving
Okay.
it. But he might have a special date on.
Oh, I
in
need to
mind.
put it on my calendar.
Yeah, just Mayor and Councilmember Tucker, just we're scheduling a call between David and our general plan consultant to talk about the approach, and then schedule a meeting with you as the chair and the mayor's vice chair to talk about how you like to see that presented to the GPAC. So I'd say in the next couple weeks, we'll get back to you and we'll schedule that meeting with you.
Okay, David, I have one quick question for you, but meanwhile, is there anybody from the audience who want to turn in a yellow card? And we'll get started on speakers, but first, David, have you had an opportunity to see the Gilroy Gardens response letter or the Visit California response letter to the report? Have you seen either of
Yes.
those? Okay, both of those call out the garden specifically and some of the language that was used. One of them in particular was this issue of housing out there. Did you want to provide any more clarity on what you were thinking regarding that issue?
Well, yeah, we aren't necessarily advocating pursuit of housing. We're advocating consideration of well-integrated units in small scale form that may be helpful, as far as housing workers, or it could be just providing a little bit of portfolio diversification for the developer to ensure that the project can be underwritten. Those are the primary reasons. Certainly, there is already a good number of, a good amount of housing immediately adjacent to the gardens, but that's not necessarily the type of housing that we would be advocating here. This is smaller scale, fully integrated seamlessly with commercial uses.
Okay.
And Mark, I would say you're pretty close to the action. If you have anything to add, you're more than welcome.
Sir,
Come up to
you're going to have to come on up and get captured on microphone.
Mark has done a tremendous amount of work here.
Mark Paulhemus, EPS associate. In Gilroy Gardens specifically, it's mixed use is referenced, but we were referring to mixed use of hospitality, entertainment uses, including hotel, restaurants, retail, not specifically multifamily, like permanent housing. Other concepts that we had considered, not included in the report, are a hotel condo concept, kind of like some of you see like in timeshare, but likely not suitable for this location, more like mountain resort locations.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, if there's nobody else from the council, let's go ahead and start hearing from the public.
Robert Weaver, followed by Susan Mister, then Carolyn Tognetti.
Back again. I'm going to try to stand up straight this time. This was quite a document. I did go over the first one. I've got the executive summary here. I've read it several times. One of the things that shortly stood out to me was the land in Gilroy that's available for development is more like a checkerboard. And to be efficient in your land use and to be the best and highest use, you need a large slate to get the best use rather than a bunch of little pieces, try to get them together. So I think land aggregation would be a strong thing, which takes me back to the first thing we talked about, and that's the Chestnut and 10th Street parcel. If you take the fire station off, then you have land aggregation, at least on that site. It's a small step in keeping with some suggestions here. Not a big piece of thing, but it's a step forward. Last week, as I heard from the mayor, we had the MTC and ABAG came out with a CASA compact. And I wondered if it were implemented, would impact this document in any way, cause it to be altered or amended. And that's a question that you can't answer, but maybe this gentleman can. Again, land aggregation. And also, it is that one that we talked about earlier. I didn't get into the fact that it is a gateway site, and Mr. Munoz was correct. That is a gateway site, and it is usually gateway sites are given a higher standard for architectural design and review. As people come into Gilroy, it's like anything else. You only have one chance to make a first opinion, and that's what people will see when they come in. So I think a lot of the things that we have need to be held to a higher standard. When I was in the service, I was taken aside by a senior petty officer who told me some wise words. He says, if the man sees you dirty, he thinks you dirty. If the man sees you clean, he thinks you clean. Now, what does that mean here? That means that if you are slovenly or dirty, unkempt, you're going to get the garbage detail. If you are clean and neat and starched and your shoes are shined, you're going to get the good job. So if you hold our architectural designs in this community to a higher level, people will think higher of Gilroy than if you just let them go with off-the-shelf Plan A. Here it is. Look at our McDonald's on First Street. Look at the McDonald's in Monterey when you go down for your League of California Cities meetings. You will see that it doesn't look like the one on First Street because they held the developer's feet to the fire for a better architectural plan. That's it.
Thank you so much, Bob, for being here.
Susan Mister, followed by Carolyn Tognetti.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council members. My name is Susan Mister. I just wanted to say, first of all, that I really appreciated David, is it EPS, his presentation last time and his presentation tonight. Very comprehensive, very informative, a lot of detail. We've heard a lot about hotels tonight, and I love that. I love the TOT tax and TBID. But I do want, but specifically going out to Gilroy Gardens, because I agree too that it is a great location for a hotel. But I'd like to keep ourselves open to attract more of a conference center. Hotels are great, 120 rooms, that's very nice. What I'd like to see is something along the lines of, well, I'm not going to go back to what we were looking at that location, but something more where we can have a large center, a conference center. And I believe that Gilroy Gardens in that area is the right location for that. The business person would be there, and then the spouse, the family could enjoy Gilroy Gardens. Maybe they would even have a shuttle to the outlets to take them to the east side of town. So before we start putting in all these hotels, I guess I'd like you to consider leaving that option open, working with Tammy and bringing in a conference center. And this really kind of touched me specifically, it was always a thought to have that when we lost Great Wolf. But, and also, it was also a dream of Mike and Claudia's. They were going to put a hotel up on the hill. But it's become apparent to me, we are taking our Spice of Life awards to San Juan Oaks all the time. We need to have that here in Gilroy. Thank you.
Carolyn Tognetti, followed by Jane Howard.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Yeah, that was a great report. It's very detailed, still lots to learn about it. I'm going to speak as a member of the General Plan Update Committee. And just wondering again about the process. I see it's going to come to us for a presentation, but what I'm thinking is some of the concepts that are in there, such as housing maybe on the east side, that's a whole big thing to study, and maybe just being presented, I'm just not sure how it's going to work, but the General Plan Update Committee is a way to engage the public, because at the time, just before this study was done and we suspended us, it was just ready to go to public meetings. We had the 3 alternatives already in place, and then it was suspended to do the study, and that's fine. And but so then the public would have been able to comment. So what I'm going to suggest is that possibly, if you like some of these suggestions, that it could be incorporated into an alternative, one of 3, to be studied by our consultants and brought to the public to comment on. So those kind of the major kind of changes that we're talking about. That's one thing. Was questioning a little bit how they came up with these certain smaller sites. The gentleman before said the larger sites. There are, within the city limits, large parcels, I'm going to say, down more south of, along the freeway, along the 101 in the south, and the Bolsa, and there, that's all within city limits. And then to look at sites that aren't within the city limits kind of doesn't make sense. It seems like sites only within the city limits, and there are plenty. I mean, there's a lot of big parcels, but they weren't looked at, so I just question why. And then comparison to those large innovation centers on 700 acres, I can't see where that fits with this either. So, and then I'm going to speak on another role. I'm on the board of the we used to be Silicon Valley Land Trust, but now it's called Santa Clara Valley Land Trust. And in speaking to the agriculture mitigation fees, I would suggest that, before you decide on it, that you talk to our executive director and get his opinion on that and how it works. His name is Greg Leonard, and I'd be happy to get you in touch with him and all of that. But what I find with possible problem with changing to collecting just the fees is that land values right now are at a certain price, and you're going to do an appraisal, and that's how you determine what the fee's going to be. But it goes into a pot or in the bank, and it takes a while. By the time you're ready, you find a willing seller to sell his easements or sell his land, you don't have enough money. So, and you never do really do the mitigation. So you have a lot of money sitting there. So that is one problem. But like I say, our director can speak to that. He may know better. He may be able to leverage money. So it may work, and I'm not saying it wouldn't work, but just want to suggest that you do that. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn, for being here.
Jane Howard, followed by Tammy Brownlow.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council, staff. First of all, very, very excited about this report. I mean, having read it now several times and just delving into the possibilities and the opportunities, it's pretty big deal for this council. A couple of points I really want to emphasize. Obviously, tourism comes up quite high in terms of possibilities and opportunities. The clock's ticking. And I really want to create some urgency with this council. We need to move. We need to make sure this is one of the top priorities in deciding what are these next steps. we stay in close communication with Visit California, obviously now being a California Welcome Center very soon. And the data we're seeing about tourism in this state, how it's increased like this for the last 7 years, we're in uncharted waters. This isn't going to continue. And we don't want to miss some of these possibilities. Hotel occupancy. As you saw, Visit Gilroy submitted some comments about that. We're right at the threshold with this 70%. You know, yes, it looks like we'll have another hotel that wants to go forward. How many 3-star hotels? And that there's nothing wrong with a 3-star hotel. That it just identifies the amenities. We've got Hampton Inn opening shortly. That's going to impact our occupancy rate. We're holding firm though with the average daily rate, which is what the hotels measure to see their success. As we look at potential hotels in the future, we certainly want to look at the possibility of a boutique hotel, or one that incorporates a convention center, or one that has these next level of amenities. Visit California is seeing some interesting data right now in this state. Luxury travel is what's growing the fastest. And I watch our neighbor, that smaller property to the north, to see how busy and how much activity we get on their website, on our website rather, and we're not even a strong, you know, where they're leading in terms of who we promote. So just want to give you that information. Use Visit Gilroy as your resource to help you with some of these decisions. We definitely want to create that factor of urgency. And the other component, I strongly agree about talking to our community about what they're looking for. I also want to recommend, though, when we're talking to the community, we got to give them data. Because if you don't, they're not going to have the information to really make good recommendation decisions. You don't just say, what do you want? Because what do we want sometimes it makes no sense in terms of location, penciling out, and just that whole overall economic development possibility. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tammy Brownlow.
Good evening, Tammy Brownlow with the Gilroy Economic Development Corporation. First of all, I just wanted to clarify some questions that Carolyn had asked previously about the sites that were included in the analysis. So all of the sites that we included were sites of 10 acres or more that were within the city limits. And yes, all the sites are within the city limits. I'm sorry if there was some confusion about the site on San Ysidro, but it is. The property on Bolsa Road that Carolyn referred to, that property was not near coming to market or anything close to that when we first began the study. First of all, it's in the general plan is industrial, but it's zoned for open space. And so since the study started, we've actually had some conversations with the property owner and the broker representing them. The site is severely constricted due to floodplain issues and agricultural setback, and there's a seismic issue there. So there is some effort moving forward now to rezone the property, but you know, that's actually that's been moving along in conjunction with this report moving forward. But again, the reason we didn't include it was because there was no interest on the part of the owners when we began the study to bring it to market, and now there is. So I just wanted to clarify that. And then, you know, just takeaways from this evening. I'm glad everybody had a chance to read and digest the report. We appreciate that. I think this was a really good effort on in partnership with the Economic Development Corporation and the city to look at these sites and these corridors, and specifically to identify some of these constraints that we've been talking about for a long time. So I really hope that the council will really prioritize some of these constraints, specifically the traffic mitigation, the ag mitigation, because unless we can figure out a way to relieve the cost and expense and the time of some of these things, some of these sites just aren't going to develop anytime in the near future. So, thank you.
Is that it? Anybody else? Okay, coming back to council. Any further thoughts or comments on this item? Councilmember Tucker.
I'm clarifying with you. So we've had two first and previous one, and then today. And at some point, are you asking council to focus on some of these next steps, or what are you asking council? Gabe.
So, Mayor and Council, this would be an opportunity for you to have a discussion at our upcoming strategic plan retreat, in which you'll have an opportunity to brainstorm and then as well as prioritize the initiatives you want to undertake. I think between now and that retreat, we would have scheduled a session with the GPAC. So you guys have an opportunity to get some feedback from that group. And then as I said, at the strategic plan goal setting retreat, I think that the opportunity is there for you to.
I always have a problem with these retreats. It's going on in my 11th or 12th year. Because it seems that if we don't get whatever we discuss in January done by December, then it's out the door. And we have talked consistently in the last 3 months about the sports park, about the art center. We've talked about priorities. So I don't know what the rest of the council is thinking, but I'm not throwing those out the door and starting fresh at our next retreat. Is that? Does anybody have any thoughts about that?
We're scratching all that and starting fresh.
No, we didn't ever agree to that. Oh, he's just pulling my leg. Okay. I was like, what?
And that's the mayor saying that. But no, you're absolutely right.
Actually, Gabe and I just had this conversation earlier this morning because we are already working on a lot of things. And staff only has so much capacity. And now we're going to come back with additional goals when they already have their direction, So anyways, go ahead.
No, I mean, that's exactly what we were talking about. And so the ag mitigation, that's definitely something that we're working as part of the sports park, for example. We are focused on the art center and downtown. So there's a lot of initiatives already underway that you've given me clear direction. So I think in terms of looking at these sites, I think we first have to look at the constraints and really look at transportation, for example. That's part of the general plan. We'll be talking about, you as a council have talked about what's an acceptable level of service. Is it certain sections of town, 10th Street, for example, we may have to go to a lower level of service, for example. So those are all discussions that you'll be engaging and you've brought up. But as we all know, the general plan is that key document that's going to give us a lot of that information for you to be able to make some decisions at a policy level. So as we continue to proceed with the general plan completion, that will present an opportunity again for you as a council to discuss those policy discussions.
And we've already given the consultant a heads up that Gabe is already working on a bunch of these priorities, but they will be contacting us individually to kind of talk through some of these things. And it's my goal, my hope, that when we do get together, that we're able to come up with some sort of comprehensive plan that incorporates a lot of what they're already doing into that. Because to your point, I don't want to start over. Yes, and it is a multi-year plan. Councilmember Blankley.
Yeah, I would have expected too that we start with what we already know is in the pike. But at our strategic planning session, I would hope that in the interest of time, that staff is prepared to answer questions with numbers, like what does it mean dollar-wise to relocate the fire station, for example. Okay, well, because otherwise we're not going to really be able to do, too much. Or what does it mean to lower our traffic service level? I mean, it means that we're not going to have the same mitigation costs, right? We're going to lower the traffic mitigation costs that would have to be implemented by a certain development if we lower the standard of service, right? So I'm just saying that I would like staff to have the information that council will need to actually do something with this information. If we have really no more than what we have tonight, I don't see how we're going to get too far.
Okay.
We know what they are. We have them here. So, okay.
Certainly, Mayor and Council, with regards to having that data, given our current capacity and where we are in terms of preparing for the budget, it's not likely that we'll have a lot of that data that you're asking in advance for the 22nd. We're gearing up for our budget study sessions. That schedule is going to be going out. We are going to be talking about some of those as part as the budget, like I said, fire services, in terms of cost for relocation of fire stations or ideal sites for that. That's going to be part of the standard of cover report, which we're not going to get in time by February. I mean, they're just now scheduling the kickoff meeting, and so that's about it's minimally 3 to 4 months before we even receive preliminary data. In terms of level of service, that ties back to the general plan and looking at density and looking at land use alternatives to determine what the projected traffic impacts are going to be in terms of trips per day, that it ties back to the general plan. So we can present that based on what we currently have, but it's not going to give you more current information with projected density and land use. And so that's just where we are today in terms of the study session for February 22nd and 23rd. I'm just being candid with you. It's not likely we'll have that information.
Well, there ought to be some way to have some, I mean, whether it's high level or not, it doesn't have to be that specific, but without some realm numerically, I don't know what we're going to accomplish.
I just wanted to add, though, as far as level of service, the general plan consultants have already gone through that. We have the data for that. So we can, in fact, I think we would have to change it. That would have to accommodate, for example, this first project we saw that we all think is a great project and we want it to come forward. We would have to change that. And I already know, because I still kept those numbers in my head, but I already know that we lowered it in the general plan by 1. We might have to lower it by 2. So there are some that the general plan consultant has already got all that data, and we can refer to them. So that might help you, Councilmember Blankley. But as far as having, it may just be that, wait, when is the retreat planned for? February.
February 22nd,
Right.
23rd.
So it may just be we only need 1 day, because we may all just go in and we see all the capacity of our staff, the capacity of our budget as far as hiring extra staff, and then what we want to accomplish. It may just be we only need 1 day, and we're going to say keep on going on the same track.
Gabe and I were going back and forth, and I told him, I said, Gabe, I don't want to hear from Councilmember Tucker saying, blah, 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 this should have been a 2-day retreat.
Well, as long as council has the time to retreat and it's not all day long of reports, then we're fine. We can take 1 day.
You're killing me, Kat. All right. Councilmember Tucker, anything else? No. All right. Okay, I think that is it. We have received this report. David, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. And we will adjourn to our next regular meeting on January 28th here in the council chambers. Meeting adjourned.